I'm one of 7 kids. I grew up in a 745 square foot house in Northeast Baltimore City. And we had 1 bathroom and 7 kids. It was a battle. So we grew up, very, I would say, poor, modest means. We were on food stamps for a little while. I had this big awareness when I was 9 years old. My mom took me to a grocery store, not a grocery store, a dime store it was called back then, a convenience store. And she goes up to the counter to pay, and she reaches into her pocketbook and she pulls out a booklet, and I'm like, there were food stamps. And it was in that moment, I was like, oh, I had to be 8 or 9. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, we are poor. And I'm like, I don't ever want that to happen for me and my family when I'm older. So I just had this thing built in that I was, driven and determined to live a good life. And not that we didn't have a good life, because we were rich because we didn't know we were poor, if that makes any sense at all, So, anyway, so, I started working. I was 11 years old. I was delivering newspapers and I was saving money, and I got to go I paid my way through Catholic high school. I got to go away to college. I played baseball, and, I had to use my own money the whole way. And when I graduated from college, I took this job in North Palm Beach, Florida, and it was a penny stock broker. And I didn't know what the heck I was getting into. And if you know penny stocks now, you could consider it highway robbery. But I didn't know what I was getting into. But one morning, there's this guy next to me. His name is Valentino Fernandez, and I will never forget this guy as long as I live, because he had a lot to do with the trajectory of my life changing. I walked in one morning, and on his desk right next to me was this book, The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. And I was done college, I was done reading, I was done testing, and there's the book right there. You see how beat up it is? I've read that book at least 8 to 10 times, and I read the same book, and hopefully I will never lose that book. But it's beat up because that's how many times I've read the thing. Anyway, so I read that book, and it changed. I went home that night, read it. It changed the trajectory of my life. The next day, I got up and went to Barnes & Nobles, and I bought every one of Og's books. I started becoming a voracious reader. And, I can sit here and tell you, since July of 1990, when I read that book, I've read about 900 books since then. And I just love reading. And I love the way Og tells his stories. And, I'm like, man, I would love to be like a writer one day who could tell a story and get the message across. And in his second book, I'm like, he talked about Og Mandino being the greatest orator of all time in the book. And I'm like, I was scared to death of public speaking. I was scared to death of getting in front of people. I was an introvert. And I'm like, but I could see me doing that because I love this stuff so much. So I thought about it. And just a side note, what happened was Og Mandino died. I got to see him in person, by the way. I saw him speak in Baltimore, and I got him to sign one of my books that I read of his. And but he died soon after, and he died on September 3rd, which was my birthday. And I'm like, ooh, is that a signal for me? Because I admire this guy and I like the guy, and I'm like, maybe I could carry on that torch, but maybe that's far-fetched, who knows? But anyway, so then it was about 2001, I really started contemplating, can I do this? Can I do it? So I wrote it as a goal around 2001, and I'm like, all right, who am I to think I'm going to write a book? Who am I to think, I can do this stuff? But I had read so many books up until that point. I'm like, I know I can do this, but I didn't feel worthy of it. My self-worth was lower. I didn't think, who's going to listen to me? Who's going to hear what I have to say? Who's going to read what I say? And who does Rob think he is that he's going to be an author? And so 2005, I wrote my first chapter. So I wrote chapter 1, and it was about awareness. And then 2009, I wrote my second chapter. So I took 4 years hiatus because I didn't think I was any good. And in chapter 2009, I wrote my second chapter, and I put it back down. I'm like, who do I think I am? I can't do this. And then 2014, I was leading an office meeting of real estate agents, and I was talking about setting goals. And Jeff, I was going through this Darren Daily book, and I said, so every year we got to have 2 to 3 big audacious goals. Well, my big audacious goal for 2014 is to write a book. And this lady, she was an agent in our office. She's in the back of the room. She raises her hand, and I'm like, yeah, how can I help you? She tells me her name. She goes, I'm going to help you write your book. I'm like, and who are you? Right. And she goes, well, my husband and I, we own a editing and publishing company. And since you've inspired me today, I want to help you write your book. And I'm like, I had chills. I got chills right now telling you this, you know? And so, so I sit down with her and her husband. We meet at Panera Bread. And her husband, as it turns out, signed he's written like 30 books over time. And he signed his first agent contract at a bar with Stephen King the same day next to each other, right? So he goes, Rob, look, if you don't believe me, he's got Stephen King's phone number in his phone. He goes, I could call him right now if you want, right? And I'm like, all the stars are lining up, man. This is so cool. So, you know, they coach me and they're like, Rob, you know, what I want you to do is just write 25 one-word chapter titles. I gave him an idea what I wanted to be about: transparency and awareness and living life to the fullest. And so he goes, take 25, just write 25 one-word chapter titles. And so we took the 25, narrowed it down to 16. And this is where, I mean, this comes into play for you, for me, for everybody, man. And what started happening is I got this big whiteboard in my home office. And I'm like, you know, I would get up in the morning and I wrote the 16 chapter titles out on the board. I spread them out. And then I started to think, and again, this is what's important for everybody. I started to think, okay, what has happened in my life in those different areas? So the first chapter is awareness. The second chapter is humility. The third chapter is transparency. The fourth is acceptance, and so on and so forth, right? And so, okay, I woke up the first morning, like, okay, let me think of a few stories of awareness. So we all have stories. Everyone on this screen here can write a book. We all have our own books inside of us. It's a matter if we choose to share it, write it, do whatever with it. But I started thinking, okay, create story folders. You know, like you think of your laptop and you go in your documents and you have all these folders. So I started thinking of, you know, Rob's book, story folders, awareness folder, humility folder, transparency folder, acceptance folder. So the first part of it was I just started logging stories in. I wouldn't write the story out. It would just be like the skiing story, the playing catch story with my dad, the you know, yelling at my son story, you know, just different stories. So I didn't write anything at all at first, except I just plugged in all these stories. So now I got this whiteboard. I got like 65 stories on the board. And then, you know, and I hope I shouldn't apologize, or I hope, you know, guys don't mind. I'm going to go spiritual here, right? So I would get up every morning. It would be 4 a.m. I'd sit at my desk and I'd look at this wall and I'd pray. And I pray. I'm like, come on, Holy Spirit, you know, talk to me and tell me what you want me to write today. And I would take a few minutes in silence. And then I would look at the board and look at the stories. And then one story would resonate with me. And I just started writing and writing and writing. And at 5 a.m., I would stop. No matter where I was, I would just stop because I wanted to be true to my time. So if I was in the middle of flow, in the middle of a story, I would stop and I'd just write down a few notes to continue the next day so I wouldn't forget where I was. And so I'm writing these chapters. And the editor's like, okay, give me the chapters as you go. Give them to me. So I'm giving them to him and he's editing them somewhat. And I'm calling him up and he's talking to me. And unfortunately, you know, I don't think this needs to go anywhere, but I'm like, I'm having a cocktail and I'm looking at the book and I could tell he started, you know, sometimes he might have had 2 or 3 cocktails, right? So, you know, finally he finishes editing the whole book and he goes, I want you to give it to 4, 5, 6 people and get some feedback and see what people are thinking, right? And then we're ready to go. He goes, I already got a typeset, I got a cover copy, I'm ready to go. So I give it to 4 or 5 people. And one lady happens to have been an editor for 15 years, which I didn't know. And I give it to her and she tears it apart, right? I take it to Brian. I asked Brian if he would look at it. Brian looks at it, he goes, Rob, he goes, you know, you got a lot of stories in here. You got 4 books in one, you know, he goes, and at that time, the title of the book was A Pathway to Peace. And he goes, my guess is it's going to be a couple years and the theme of the book is going to change. You got to figure out exactly what it is and the title is going to change. And sure enough, that happened, right? And so I went back to the editor and I would give him this feedback and he blew a lid. He's like, I didn't want you to get that kind of feedback. I'm not rewriting this whole thing. I just typeset this and I'm not going through all that. This thing costs time and money. And I'm like, Tom, what do you want me to do? You asked me to do that, right? So we didn't talk for like 2 or 3 weeks. And I went started asking people for referrals from new editors and publishers. So I found somebody. And she goes, send me your manuscript, right? So I send her the manuscript, and I send a 257-page manuscript, black and white, and I get it back 2 weeks later, and it's more red than black. Right? So talk about humility or being humbled, that's very, very humbling in the moment. So needless to say, 14 edits later, and a lot of days of doubt, because there was times I took it to my wife and I said, Deb, I don't know if I can do this. It's hard. It was really hard because you think you create something good and you got to have thick skin. And then when somebody tells you, this doesn't sound right, or that's not good, or you got to eliminate this story, you're like, wow, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, so it's humbling. So needless to say, we got it done, man. We got it done. When I finished writing the last sentence in June, I think it was June 23rd of 2017. I thought I was going to have this big flow of emotions, and it didn't happen. I was like, wow, that was interesting. And then when I got the first set of edits and I fixed them all, I'm in Panera again by myself, by the window, and I finished the last set of edits. This was like in August, like 2 or 3 months later. And I finished that last edit and I hit save. I'm in Panera by myself and I start bawling. Flood of tears. And I'm like, those kind of tears, And I got my hand on my head and I'm looking out the window. I'm like, I hope nobody sees me. Right? So that was the start of the next 13 edits, And, but we got it done. And then I'm going to tell you a few more things about the book and then we'll get into awareness. And so, we had like 40, it might have been 42 titles that I'm throwing at the editor, right? And nah, this isn't good. That's not good. This is okay, but we got to tweak it a little bit. That's not good. This isn't what we're saying in the book, And then again, you get humbled. You think you got some great ideas, and she's shooting them down left and right. And so I want to come back to the title, but then we had to get a picture too. And she had this idea, and she sent it to me, and the designer and the publisher loved the picture. And I hated it. I'm like, and they're like, Rob, this is good. We got to go with this. And I'm showing it to people and I'm really insecure about it. And it looked like an adult cartoon book, Jeff, I don't have it with me. I can't show it to you right now. So I went back to the editor, he said, plain, just plain, simple, plain, maybe get the point across, create a little interest. And I said, I want to go with this. I'm going to go with this. I said, that's it. We're going with this. So we settled on this. And then we're still dealing with this title thing. So remember, I told you that I was praying every morning, and I prayed to the Holy Spirit. And so I get down and I sit at my desk, and I'm looking at that whiteboard again. And I had another moment, and I'm looking at it, and I'm praying, and I'm like, come on, talk to me. And I start looking at all these stories, and I start getting tears in my eyes. And it's hard for me not to get emotional right now. And I'm looking at the board, and it hit me, man. I'm like, oh my God, all these stories. I'm like, my life is better than I thought it was. It was so much better than I thought it was. And as soon as I said those words, I'm like, that's the title, Better Than You Think. That's it. So I called her up. I said, this is what we're going with. I don't care what anybody says, thinks, or does. Life is better than you think. We're going with it. So that's how the title came about. And so it's been a pretty cool ride so far. It got published on November 22nd. Went live on Amazon second week in January. And, it's Jeff, Jeff, you've seen it, you've read it. Thank you very much for that. And it's been really cool. So the first gift of the book was the title. So if I sold not one copy or no one else liked the book, I got my gift. I got it right in the title from the realization or the awareness of that my life is better than I think.